Good morning. Thank you for giving me this opportunity to share with you my comments on the recent political events in Palestine. I hope they will give you some food for thought and some material for discussion. So after dealing two devastating blows to the Palestinians on the status of Jerusalem and U.S. aid to the Palestinian Authority and UNRWA, Trump might be actually ready to reverse U.S. policy on the occupation. Although a spokeswoman for the State Department denied that the U.S. has changed its position on the Israeli occupation, it was reported that U.S. Ambassador David Friedman has already ordered the State Department to refrain from using this word, occupation, to refer to Israel's alleged occupation of the West Bank. Trump could follow suit. He would not only strike the word occupation off the American playbook on Middle Eastern politics, but more dangerously endorse the Likud Party's Central Committee's colonialist policies of annexation of the West Bank. How to read then Trump's decisions or politics on Palestine? Trump's putatively anti-Palestinian policies are part and parcel of a wider global campaign that aims at accelerating and sharpening the internal contradictions and antagonisms that inform the new shift toward authoritarian capitalist politics and the global capitalist system at both national and international levels. Some Palestinian commentators have argued that Trump has it in for the Palestinians. I would argue otherwise, that Palestine is only one critical issue in a constellation of global crises and contradictions where the truth of the brutality of Trump's politics appears in its worst shape. These contradictions include many, like ecological catastrophe, immigration, racism, freedom of press, resources, wars, polarization of wealth, and the war on the poor and the have-nots and the haves-not in the new regime, a new apartheid regime around the world. In his morally bankrupt ideology, Trump refers to these vulnerable and disposable groups, the 99% of the world's population, as the worst of the worst. He has also reduced them to metaphors of garbage and waste, feces, the way he has done to Muslim refugees and immigrants, DACA recipients, Salvadorans, Haitians, and Africans. Palestinians must choose the worst and actualize the promise for a radical change in the system, and this is where hope comes from, in my opinion. So at the international level, Trump's politics have exploded many contradictions. And I would like to talk, first of all, about one major political contradiction that relates to his anti-Palestinian politics. Excuse me. At the political level, Trump's anti-Palestinian politics exposes the limits and contradictions of American hegemony and soft power in the world. In these times of geopolitical transitions, U.S. hegemony in the Middle East and around the world is in decline. And other world powers, especially China, are ready to step in to fill the void left by the erosion of Pax Americana. As it has become amply clear, the political and diplomatic agenda of the current White House on the Middle East is, for all intents and purposes, set outside the corridors of power in Washington. The Trump administration's agenda has been defined in collusion with foreign governments, including the Israeli government, through the mediation of business moguls who are willing and ready to compromise American national security and interests in return for massive foreign investments in their personal business empires. The international reaction to Trump's anti-Palestinian politics clearly demonstrates this decline in American power around the world. The extent and volume of the international opposition to Trump's illegal and immoral declaration on Jerusalem, an outrage against their blatant blackmail and bullying of these countries in the UN becomes clearer when the number of the countries that voted for rescinding the Jerusalem Declaration, which is 128 countries, is translated into world population size. So to break it down, 90.5% of the world population rejected the Trump decision, while 9% of the world's population abstained, and only 0.5% backed up the United States. Moreover, his immoral attack on the Palestinians reveals the ideological inconsistencies in the international fascist ultra-right alliances. Trump's anti-Semitic Zionist convictions might seem to benefit the Zionist settler colonial project and the apartheid politics of the Israeli occupation in the short term, but the long-term ramifications of such proclamations to Israel's sovereignty in Jerusalem still remain unclear, as many political commentators have pointed out. Ironically, the support for this anti-Semitic Zionist politics is coming from none other than the emergent Muslim Zionist bloc, which is reinvigorating its unholy alliance with the Israeli government against the Shiite bloc in the region. Arab governments have worked in cahoots with the Trump administration on what has been dubbed the deal of the century, which President Abbas has just referred to at the PLO's Central Council meeting in Ramallah on Sunday as the slap of the century. This new axis of evil, as these countries have been called, has been responsible not only for the waves of refugees from the Middle East, but also for the current attempt to liquidate the Palestinian cause altogether. Now, in addition to these international contradictions, I would like to point out a couple of contradictions that have exploded at the Palestinian level as a result of the crisis that Trump caused in Middle Eastern and Palestinian politics. The first one relates to the Palestinian Authority and its legitimacy. So in response to Trump's threat to cut off aid to the Palestinian Authority, many Palestinian activists and media pundits urged him to make good on his threats. They hoped that such a move would bring down the Palestinian Authority and lead to its total collapse and the termination of all accords and agreements for which it stands. Little, it seems, did Trump know about the controversy over international aid in Palestinian circles. Many Palestinians have accused international donors of financing the occupation, domesticating Palestinian civil society, and undermining civil resistance. Although President Abbas has recently acknowledged that the PA is an, quote, authority without any authority, unquote, the dissolution of the PA is not feasible and will not probably be allowed to happen for three different reasons. First, Palestinians do not have any leverage to dictate settlement terms or force concessions in their negotiations with the Israelis. Unlike Pakistan, for example, Palestine will not be able to use its own dissolution or demise as a bargaining chip in any negotiations. Second, Palestinians are aware that once the PA collapses, neighboring Arab countries are ready to step in and take over the West Bank and Gaza. And third, Israel will probably intercede with the Trump administration on behalf of the PA, as it did in the past, to keep the PA in place. These days, the PA, especially after the last meeting on Sunday, is flirting with the possibility of nixing both the Oslo Accords and the security coordination with Israel. But commentators concur that no game-changing strategies are in sight. The other major contradiction that exploded as a result of Trump's anti-Palestinian politics centers around the decline of popular resistance in the occupied Palestinian territories and Gaza. Palestinian media pundits pointed out the adverse effects that the wedge between official Palestinian national discourse and popular resistance has on the mobilization of the masses in the struggle against Trump's decrees and the occupation. Against all predictions, calls for days of rage right after Trump's Jerusalem declaration did not draw out the crowds and protesters that many media outlets were predicting. Although 20 Palestinians have been killed, thousands injured, and over 1,000 arrested after clashes with Israeli military and police, Jerusalem did not come crashing down, and there was no revolution or new intifada to televise. With the eclipse of the spontaneous or organized mass popular resistance, however, the debate about civil resistance and armed resistance is back in the news. The Israeli government's attempt to clamp down on civil nonviolent resistance has created a gap which more violent forms of resistance are trying to fill. Recently, Israel has not only detained Ahid Tamimi, a fearless young Palestinian woman who has been involved in unarmed civil resistance to the Israeli occupation all her life. Ahid's arrest has also reignited the international controversy over Israel's targeted killings and mistreatment of Palestinian children under detention. The Israeli government, as you all know, has also published the BDS blacklist, banning the members of 20 organizations, including pro-Palestinian Jewish activist organizations, from entering Israel, while at the same time allowing many anti-Semitic nationalist leaders from Europe to entry into Israel. This crackdown on peaceful and nonviolent resistance created the conditions for the return of armed resistance to the occupation. Although no Palestinian faction or organization has claimed responsibility for the killing of an Israeli settler rabbi in a drive-by shooting near Nablus last week, media pundits view this as an indication of a, quote, pivotal change in the general Palestinian mood towards a return to armed resistance, unquote. So where does that leave us? And this is where I see politics of hope emerging. Trump's campaign against the Palestinians echoes his anti-poor and anti-immigrant politics. And my suggestion is that Palestinians must continue working in solidarity with these disposable communities to make a difference in the world. For this to happen, Palestinians must reject any real or fictional support system that can allegedly fulfill their national dreams or conveniently provide fantasies of national wholeness and unity. The answer to the Palestinian struggle should not come from any belief in the big white hope, the way that President Abbas felt about Trump when he called him, "You are the hope," who will one day reward the Palestinians for their alleged behavior. The most recent PLO Central Committee meeting reveals that the Americans will still play a role in any future negotiations, even though it's not that of the exclusive mediator. Moreover, Palestinians seem to be gravitating towards the international community, whether it's the EU or the United Nations, China, Russia, for a solution, despite the fact that, as President Abbas noted, none of the 86 UN Security Council resolutions on Palestine were implemented. In short, the master is an imposter, whether it is the Americans or the international community, and they know it. Neither can redemptions to the Palestinian come from assertions of ancient history and national or religious identity. Palestinians must refuse to play by the same dirty playbook that underlie the Zionist Hasbara manual with its unfounded biblical fables and mythic history of eternal capitals. The emphasis on particular and religious national identities in these reimagined histories and traditions obfuscates the immanent dimension of universality in each identity. Such rhetoric prevents genuine transformation. I believe that radical change lies with rejecting all these forms of phantasmatic support and substituting them for genuine identification with what is left out of the global system, the garbage and the waste that Trump has just identified. They are the truth of this system. By choosing the worst of the worst, to use Trump's words, and uniting with them in a common emancipatory struggle, Palestinians can actualize the universal ideals for which they stand and reinvigorate the class struggle that Trump's politics has been intensifying around the world. Today, many groups in the United States, many poor groups, are uniting in a renewed campaign that was started by Martin Luther King, the Poor People's Campaign. And I think that Palestinians would do well if they adapt the Poor People's Campaign to the realities of Palestine and articulate it through a renewed or denationalized and anti-imperial tricontinental politics that was common in the past. This way, I think we can see some change in the region. Thank you very much for giving me this opportunity.